For over 12 years, he woke up every morning to the same quiet companion. Then one winter, he realized that love was about to ask him something very hard. He didn't pray for his old friend to be saved. He prayed for peace and the strength to do the right thing. And somehow,
buddy.
in that gentle goodbye,
It's okay.
the pain didn't end, but a small miracle did begin. The kind that teaches a heart how to keep going. If this story touched your heart, please share it and leave a comment below. May God bless you and those you love. Snow fell in slow, steady sheets, muting the world into silence. The suburban street lay buried beneath white drifts, rooftops softened, footsteps erased almost as soon as they appeared. Winter had settled in deeply, the kind that lingered in bones and memories. Mark Wilson woke before the alarm, as he often did now. At 48, his sleep had grown lighter, fragmented by thoughts he rarely named. He lay still for a moment, listening, not to the wind outside, but to the house itself. For 12 years, there had always been a sound in the mornings, paws on hardwood, a familiar thump against the bedroom door, an impatient huff announcing breakfast time. This morning, there was nothing. Mark sat up slowly. He was a broad-shouldered man, once athletic, now carrying the quiet stiffness of age and routine. His hair, dark brown threaded with gray at the temples, stood slightly unkempt from sleep. A short beard shadowed his jaw, trimmed but never clean-shaven, giving him a permanently tired look. His face bore the lines of someone who smiled rarely but deeply when he did. Since his wife's death 6 years earlier, people often described him as reserved, polite, distant, never unkind, just withdrawn. He pulled on a sweater and padded down the hall barefoot, the cold floor biting at his soles. The living room greeted him with dim winter light and the low crackle of the fireplace he had left burning through the night. Buddy lay beside it. Buddy was a golden retriever, 12 years old, his once shining coat now pale and thinned with age. His fur, still soft, had lost its fullness, especially around the hips and spine, where bone showed faintly beneath the skin. White had crept into the gold around his muzzle and eyes. His ears, once alert and playful, rested low now, framing a face that carried patience rather than joy. He had been a large dog in his prime, strong and steady, the kind that never needed a leash to stay close. Now, his body seemed too heavy for him. "Hey boy," Mark said quietly. Buddy's eyes opened, dark and gentle, tracking Mark's movement. His tail twitched once against the rug, a weak imitation of the enthusiastic thumping it used to be. He did not try to stand. Mark crouched beside him, instinctively reaching out. His hand sank into Buddy's fur, warm from the fire. "It's okay," he murmured, more to himself than to the dog. "Take your time." Buddy shifted, muscles trembling beneath Mark's palm. He tried to push himself up, front legs bracing, back legs lagging behind as if they belonged to another body entirely. After a moment, he gave up and settled back down with a soft exhale. No whine, no complaint, just acceptance. A tightness formed in Mark's chest. For 12 years, Buddy had been constant. He had been there the night Mark came home alone from the hospital, carrying nothing but a folded jacket that still smelled like his wife. He had been there through long winters when Mark spoke to no one, through summers when the house felt too big and too quiet. Buddy never demanded explanations. He simply stayed. Mark filled the dog's bowl with water and knelt beside him, lifting it gently to Buddy's mouth. Buddy drank slowly, stopping often to rest. His breathing was heavier than usual, each rise of his chest deliberate, measured. "You don't have to follow me today," Mark said, forcing a softness into his voice. "Just rest." The day passed in fragments. Mark canceled errands, ignored emails, let the phone ring unanswered. He moved through the house quietly, aware of every sound Buddy made or didn't make. At noon, Buddy refused food. In the afternoon, he slept, chest rising and falling with uneven rhythm. Outside, the snow continued to fall, thickening the silence. As evening approached, the temperature dropped further. Mark added another log to the fire and sat on the floor beside Buddy, his back against the couch. He watched the dog's chest, counting breaths without meaning to. Too fast, then too slow. A memory surfaced unbidden. Buddy as a puppy, tumbling through this same room, skidding on the floor, crashing into furniture without fear. Mark remembered laughing then, really laughing, surprised by the sound of it. Now, the room felt smaller. When darkness settled outside, Mark reached for Buddy again, this time more carefully. His fingers traced along the dog's side, feeling the shallow movement beneath. That was when he noticed it, the slight stiffness, the unnatural tension just under the ribs. He pressed gently, and Buddy flinched, not sharply, but enough. Mark froze. His hand hovered, then withdrew. His breath caught somewhere between inhale and exhale. He had seen this before, years ago, with another dog, another life. He had promised himself he would never ignore signs again. Buddy's eyes met his, calm, unafraid. Mark remained kneeling there, the firelight flickering across his face, illuminating the moisture gathering in his eyes. Outside, the wind carried snow against the windows, soft but persistent. Inside, Mark did not move. He stayed that way for a long time, listening to Buddy breathe, feeling the weight of a realization he could not yet bring himself to name. Mark noticed it first when he stood up from the kitchen table. He had only taken 3 steps toward the sink when he heard the soft, dragging sound behind him. Not paws padding lightly the way they used to, but something heavier nails scraping faintly against the floor, followed by a pause. When he turned around, Buddy was there, halfway across the living room, his body angled awkwardly as if each movement required negotiation. Buddy's front legs held, though they trembled. His back legs lagged, stiff and uncertain, hips swaying slightly with each step. His tail did not wag. It hovered low, making only the smallest motion, like a habit his body remembered, even if the strength no longer existed. "Buddy," Mark said, his voice firmer than he felt, "you don't need to follow me." Buddy stopped. He looked up at Mark with the same steady gaze he had always had. Dark eyes, clouded slightly with age, but still sharp with awareness. There was no confusion in them, only intent. Mark exhaled slowly and crossed the room in 2 long strides. He crouched, placing a hand against Buddy's chest, feeling the uneven rhythm beneath his palm. "You don't have to prove anything," he murmured. "I'm not going anywhere." Buddy leaned into the touch, his weight shifting forward until his shoulder pressed against Mark's knee. For a moment, Mark stayed there, letting the contact ground him. He had learned over the years that Buddy did not seek reassurance for himself. Buddy sought it for Mark. That realization came back to him often now, sharp and unavoidable. After his wife, Emily, died, Mark had stopped expecting companionship. Emily had been the social one, tall, slender, with auburn hair she never quite managed to tame, freckles scattered across her pale skin. She laughed loudly, talked to strangers, remembered birthdays. Mark had been the quiet counterweight to her warmth, content to stand slightly behind, steady but unseen. When cancer took her in less than a year, it also took the version of Mark that knew how to reach outward. Buddy had been barely a year old then. In those early months, Mark had not cried in front of anyone. Not at the funeral. Not when neighbors brought casseroles and spoke in soft voices. But at night, when the house grew unbearably silent, Buddy would climb onto the bed, curl his body against Mark's chest, and stay there until morning. Mark had never trained him to do that. Buddy simply understood. Now, that same dog struggled to take 10 steps across the room and still followed. Mark lifted Buddy carefully and guided him back to the rug near the fireplace. Buddy resisted at first, not with aggression, but with stubbornness. He wanted to stand. He wanted to remain upright. Mark recognized that look. He saw it every morning in the mirror. The refusal to admit weakness, even when it was undeniable. "Okay," Mark said quietly. "We mean it today." The afternoon light shifted, gray and flat through the windows. Snow piled against the glass in uneven ridges. The world outside reduced to shapes and motionless white. No cars passed. No children played. The neighborhood felt abandoned, as if winter had claimed it entirely. Buddy slept for a while, but his rest was shallow. Each time Mark stood or moved to another room, Buddy stirred. Once, when Mark went down the hallway to retrieve a blanket, he heard the scrape again. He turned quickly. Buddy had managed only 2 steps before stopping, his legs buckling slightly beneath him. He did not fall, but the effort left him breathing hard, sides rising and falling in visible strain. Mark crossed the distance in seconds and knelt, one hand bracing Buddy's chest, the other steadying his back. "Hey," he said softly, forcing calm into his tone. "I'm right here." Buddy's head dipped, resting briefly against Mark's shoulder. The contact lasted only a moment before Buddy straightened again, as if embarrassed by the need. Mark swallowed hard. Later, as dusk crept in, Mark sat on the floor beside Buddy with an old photo album open on his lap. He hadn't planned to take it out demonstrated. It happened without conscious decision, his hands moving while his mind resisted. There they were, photos of Buddy as a dog. Photos of Emily laughing beside him, a life that felt both distant and painfully close. Buddy lifted his head when Mark turned a page, eyes tracking the movement. "You remember her," Mark said. It wasn't a question. Buddy's ears twitched at the sound of Emily's name. He let out a soft breath and settled again, his body pressed firmly against Mark's leg. As night approached, Buddy's breathing grew heavier. Mark noticed the pauses between breaths, the way Buddy's chest seemed to hesitate before rising again. He reached out, fingers resting lightly along Buddy's ribs, careful not to press. The warmth beneath his hand was still there, the life. But it felt fragile now, like something held together by will alone. Mark did not say what he was thinking. He did not allow himself to finish the thought that hovered just beyond reach. Instead, he stayed on the floor beside Buddy as the snow continued to fall, the house quiet except for the sound of breathing. One steady, one struggling, both refusing in their own ways to let go. 2. The clinic smelled faintly of disinfectant and wet coats. Mark carried Buddy through the glass doors, snow clinging to the hem of his jacket, melting into dark spots on the tile. Buddy's body felt lighter than it should have, his weight distributed unevenly in Mark's arms, as if he no longer fully occupied himself. The receptionist looked up and softened immediately. She was a young woman with tied-back blonde hair and tired eyes, practiced kindness settling into her expression. She said Buddy's name aloud, gently, and Mark flinched at how natural it sounded in someone else's mouth. A few minutes later, they were led into an examination room painted a pale, reassuring blue. Dr. Alan Reeves entered quietly. He was a man in his early 50s, tall, with a lean build and wire-framed glasses that slipped slightly down his nose when he spoke. His hair had gone gray early, and he wore it close-cropped, practical. There was nothing dramatic about him, no theatrical sympathy, no unnecessary pauses. Mark sensed immediately that this was a man who had learned to survive by being honest, even when honesty hurt. Dr. Reeves knelt to Buddy's level first, letting the dog sniff his hand. Buddy did not move much, but his eyes followed the doctor carefully. The examination was thorough and unhurried. Mark watched every touch, every subtle reaction, cataloging them as if preparing for an argument he hoped he wouldn't need to make. When it was over, Dr. Reeves straightened and rested his hands on the counter. He did not speak right away. The silence stretched, heavy but deliberate. "He's very old," the doctor said finally. "For a golden retriever, 12 is already beyond the average." He glanced at Mark, then back at Buddy. "His organs are failing. There's significant muscle loss. I don't see signs of acute pain yet, but that will change." Mark's jaw tightened. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying there isn't a treatment that fixes this," Dr. Reeves replied. His voice was steady, not unkind. "We can manage discomfort for a short time, but recovery isn't realistic." Mark nodded once, sharply. He had expected the words. That didn't make them easier to hear. Before he could respond, the door opened slightly. A woman stepped in, holding a clipboard. She was in her mid-30s, tall and slender, with dark hair pulled into a severe bun. Her skin was olive-toned, her expression professional to the point of distance. She introduced herself as Karen Lowe, a social services coordinator who occasionally worked with the clinic on welfare cases involving animals and elderly owners. Her presence felt intrusive immediately. "I understand this is a difficult moment," Karen said, her tone careful but rehearsed. "But in cases like this, we encourage owners to consider early intervention. Prolonging decline can increase suffering." Mark turned toward her slowly. He noticed details he hadn't before, the way she stood slightly back, as if already braced for resistance, the faint impatience beneath her measured calm. "He's not a case," Mark said. His voice was quiet, but there was an edge beneath it. "He's my family." Karen's lips pressed together briefly. "I didn't mean to imply otherwise, but sometimes love makes it hard to see what's best." That was when the anger surfaced, sudden and sharp. Mark felt it rise from somewhere deep, a place he hadn't accessed in years. "You think I can't see him?" he said. "You think I don't know what he is to me?" Dr. Reeves intervened gently, placing himself between them without moving closer. "Mark," he said, using his name deliberately, "no one is accusing you of neglect. A voice from the hallway cut in before Mark could reply. Sometimes people hold on too long. It belonged to Mrs. Harlan, a neighbor from 2 houses down. She stood in the doorway, her coat still on, a scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. She was in her late 60s, her posture rigid, face lined with the firmness of someone who believed deeply in restraint. Mark had seen her walking her small terrier every morning for years. They exchanged nods, never more. He looks miserable, she continued, not unkindly, but without hesitation. It's selfish to pretend otherwise. The word landed harder than anything else that day. Selfish. Mark did not raise his voice. He did not step forward. He simply bent and adjusted his grip on Buddy, drawing the dog closer against his chest. Buddy's head rested beneath Mark's chin, his breath warm against Mark's neck. "We're leaving," Mark said. No one stopped him. Outside, the snow had intensified, wind driving it sideways across the parking lot. Mark moved carefully, shielding Buddy with his body as best he could. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of the dog's weight, but because of what had been said, what had been implied. In the car, Mark sat for a long moment before turning the key. Buddy lay across the seat beside him, eyes half closed, breathing shallow but steady. Mark rested a hand on his chest, feeling the rise and fall. For the first time, Mark understood that loving Buddy, openly choosing to stay, choosing not to rush, came with judgment, with scrutiny, with people who believed kindness had a deadline. He pulled out of the lot slowly, snow swallowing the tracks behind him, carrying Buddy home through a world that suddenly felt less forgiving than it had the day before. The power went out just after dusk. At first, Mark thought it was a brief flicker, the kind winter storms often caused, but when the lights failed to return and the heater fell silent, the house changed its sound. The familiar low hum vanished, replaced by a deeper quiet, broken only by the wind pressing against the walls. Snow hammered softly at the windows, thick and relentless, as if the night itself were closing in. Mark lit 2 candles from the emergency drawer in the kitchen. Their flames wavered, throwing uneven shadows across the living room. Buddy lay where Mark had settled him earlier, near the fireplace that now provided only fading warmth. The dog's outline looked thinner in candlelight, his ribs faintly visible when he shifted, his golden coat dulled to the color of old straw. Mark wrapped another blanket around Buddy, tucking it carefully along his sides. "Just for the night," he said, though no one had asked. The temperature dropped steadily. Mark pulled on a jacket and sat on the floor beside Buddy, his back against the couch. The cold seeped upward through the wood, but he did not move. He placed one hand flat against Buddy's chest, feeling the fragile rise and fall beneath his palm. Outside, the storm intensified. Wind rattled the windows, and snow piled against the door, sealing the house from the rest of the world. It felt deliberate, almost personal, like the night had chosen them. Mark stared at the candle flame for a long time before speaking. "I've been afraid of this," he said quietly. Buddy's eyes opened slightly. They were cloudy now, but still focused, still present. His ears twitched at the sound of Mark's voice. "I don't mean losing you," Mark continued. His throat tightened, and he paused until he could breathe again. "I mean after." The words sounded small in the dark, but once spoken, they refused to disappear. Mark had learned how to survive silence after Emily died. He learned how to cook for one, how to sleep on half a bed, how to answer polite questions with short replies. What he had not learned was how to be witnessed again. Buddy had filled that space without effort. Buddy had been there when Mark talked aloud to no one, when he muttered thoughts he didn't trust another human to hear. "If you're gone," Mark said, staring at the floor now, "there's no one left who knows the version of me that existed before everything broke." His hand trembled slightly against Buddy's chest. Buddy shifted, lifting his head with effort. The movement was slow, deliberate, costing more than it should have. He rested his chin against Mark's wrist, the weight light but intentional. Mark closed his eyes. "You stayed," he whispered, "when I didn't know how to." The candle flickered violently as a gust of wind forced its way through a crack in the window frame. Mark adjusted it with one hand, then returned his attention to Buddy. The dog's breathing was uneven, now short inhale, pause, longer exhale, as if his body were carefully rationing energy. Mark spoke again, softer. "They think I'm holding on because I'm scared." A bitter smile crossed his face, unseen in the dark. "They're not wrong, just not for the reason they think." He leaned forward slightly, bringing his forehead close to Buddy's head without touching. "I'm scared you're worried about me." The thought had come to him earlier, quietly, and refused to leave. Buddy had always been perceptive, responding not to commands, but to emotional shifts. He knew when Mark needed him without being asked. Mark had seen it too many times to dismiss it now. Buddy made a small sound, then, not a bark, not a whine, but a breath pushed out through the nose, almost a sigh. His eyes closed again, but his body remained angled toward Mark, maintaining contact. Mark felt something ease in his chest, even as something else broke open. "I don't know how to promise you I'll be okay," he said. "I don't know how to prove it." He reached up and brushed his thumb gently along Buddy's muzzle, stopping when Buddy's breathing hitched slightly. Mark withdrew immediately, guilt flashing through him, but Buddy did not pull away. Instead, he pressed closer, using what little strength he had left to maintain the connection. The house grew colder. Mark could see his breath now, faint clouds forming in front of his mouth. He shifted his body closer to Buddy, sharing warmth, forming a barrier against the night. For a long time, neither of them moved. Mark became aware of a quiet truth settling in him, not sudden, not dramatic, but steady. Buddy was not fighting the inevitable. He was enduring it, staying present, waiting not for rescue, but for reassurance. And in that moment, Mark understood something that frightened him more than the loss itself. Buddy was not afraid of dying. Buddy was afraid of leaving Mark alone. The realization landed gently, devastating in its clarity. Mark swallowed hard, his jaw tightening as tears gathered, unspilled. "I hear you," he said finally, his voice barely audible over the storm. "I hear you." Buddy's breathing steadied slightly, as if the words had reached him. The candle burned lower, snow continued to fall, and in the quiet, sealed-off world of that living room, a confession had been made. Not of weakness, but of love that understood what it meant to let go. Morning arrived without light. The storm had passed during the night, but it left the world sealed in white. Snow pressed against the windows in smooth, unbroken layers, swallowing edges, muting distance. The silence felt heavier than the dark had been. Mark woke on the living room floor, his back stiff, one arm numb from having stayed too long in the same position. For a moment he didn't move. He listened. Buddy's breathing was still there, but different, shallower, irregular. Mark pushed himself upright and leaned over him. Buddy lay exactly where he had been through the night, but his body no longer tried to adjust when Mark shifted. His eyes were closed. When Mark said his name, softly at first, nothing happened. "Buddy," Mark said again, louder now. The dog's eyelids fluttered, then opened part way. His gaze struggled to focus before finding Mark's face. There was recognition, but no strength behind it. His tail did not move. "That's okay," Mark said quickly, his voice tight. "You're okay." He wasn't sure who he was trying to convince. Mark reached for the water bowl and tilted it gently, but Buddy turned his head away, a small motion that cost him effort. Mark froze, then set the bowl aside. His hands hovered uselessly in the cold air. The phone rang. The sound cut sharply through the quiet, jarring enough to make Mark flinch. He stared at the screen before answering, already knowing who it would be. "Mark," Dr. Reeves said. His voice was calm, professional, unchanged. "I wanted to check in after yesterday." Mark closed his eyes. "He made it through the night." There was a pause. "I'm glad," the doctor said, "but I need to be honest with you. That window is closing." Mark swallowed. He leaned closer to Buddy, resting his forehead briefly against the dog's shoulder. "I know. We can help him," Dr. Reeves continued, "but waiting won't make this easier for him, or for you." Mark did not respond right away. His gaze moved around the room. The couch Buddy had slept beside for years, the scuffed doorframe where Buddy used to sit waiting for walks, the leash hanging untouched by the door. When he spoke again, his voice was steadier than he expected. "We're coming in." After the call ended, Mark stayed where he was, hand resting on Buddy's chest. He felt the faint rise beneath his palm, fragile but present. Buddy's eyes remained open now, watching him without urgency. "I'm here," Mark said. "I've got you." He moved slowly, deliberately. He wrapped Buddy in the thickest blanket he owned, the one Emily had insisted on buying years ago because it was ridiculously warm. He lifted Buddy carefully, surprised again by how little the dog weighed now. Buddy did not resist. He did not tense. He simply allowed himself to be held. Outside, the air was sharp and clean, the kind of cold that burned the lungs. Mark cradled Buddy against his chest as he walked to the car, shielding him from the wind. Snow crunched beneath his boots, loud in the stillness. The drive was quiet. Roads were nearly empty, plowed but narrow, bordered by walls of snow. Mark kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting against Buddy's side. He felt every breath, counted them without meaning to. At a red light, his mind betrayed him, replaying Mrs. Harlan's voice from the day before. Selfish. Mark's jaw tightened. He looked down at Buddy's face gray around the muzzle, eyes tired but trusting. If loving this dog meant being misunderstood, so be it. He spoke aloud, voice low in the empty car. "I'm not choosing what's easiest. I'm choosing what hurts less for you." Buddy's breathing stuttered briefly, then steadied again. The clinic came into view, its sign half buried in snow. Mark parked and sat for a moment longer, engine running, heat blowing weakly through the vents. He pressed his forehead against the steering wheel, breath catching despite his effort to control it. "You stayed when I couldn't," he whispered. "Let me do this right." Inside, the warmth hit him all at once. The receptionist from the day before looked up and immediately understood. She said nothing, simply opened the door to the exam room. Dr. Reeves entered soon after, his expression softer this time. He spoke gently, explaining what would happen, asking permission before every step. Mark nodded, hearing the words without absorbing them. Buddy lay on the table, still wrapped in the blanket. Mark stood close, one hand resting on Buddy's head, fingers tracing familiar lines. Buddy's eyes followed him, calm, unafraid. Mark did not cry. Not yet. The decision had already been made. Not in the clinic, not on the phone, but sometime in the quiet of the night before, when Buddy had leaned into his hand and trusted him completely. Mark bent closer, his voice barely audible. "You don't have to hold on anymore." Buddy exhaled, slow and deep, and for the first time that morning, his body fully relaxed. The examination room was quiet in a way Mark had never noticed before. Not the sterile quiet of a clinic between appointments, but a deeper stillness, one that seemed to hold its breath. The walls were a soft, neutral color, meant to calm, and the overhead light had been dimmed. A small window looked out onto the parking lot, where snow continued to fall in slow, indifferent lines. Buddy lay on the table, still wrapped in the blanket Mark had brought from home. His body was completely relaxed now, as if the effort of holding himself together had finally been set aside. Mark stood close, one hand resting on Buddy's head, fingers moving in small, familiar circles between the ears. The motion was instinctive, muscle memory shaped by years of repetition. Dr. Alan Reeves remained nearby, speaking only when necessary. His posture was careful, respectful, his movements unhurried. Mark noticed vaguely the way the doctor's shoulders seemed to slope inward, as if this part of the job carried its own private weight. There were no rushed explanations, no unnecessary reassurances, only quiet competence. Mark leaned closer to Buddy. He spoke softly, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Thank you," he said, "for staying when I didn't know how, for walking me through days I didn't think I'd survive." Buddy's eyes were half closed, his breathing slow and even. There was no fear in him now, only trust. Mark continued, words coming without effort, as if they had been waiting for permission. He thanked Buddy for the mornings, for the walks that forced him outside when grief would have kept him inside. He thanked him for the nights, for the warmth beside him, when the house felt too large and too quiet. He thanked him for loving without conditions, without questions. When the moment came, it was gentle. Mark felt it not as an absence, but as a release. Buddy's body softened further, the tension he had carried for so long finally gone. Mark kept his hand where it was, grounding himself in the reality of touch, even as something irrevocable shifted. He did not look away. Afterward, Mark remained where he was. Time stretched, then loosened. Dr. Reeves spoke quietly, offering space rather than direction. Eventually, Mark nodded. He adjusted the blanket himself, tucking it carefully around Buddy, as if the dog might feel the cold. Outside, the snow did not stop. The drive home felt longer than before, though the roads were the same. Mark kept the radio off. The silence was different now, not expectant, not fearful, just empty. When he entered the house, the absence hit him immediately, not as pain, but as a hollow pressure, like stepping into a room after the furniture has been removed. The leash still hung by the door. The water bowl sat untouched in the corner. The rug by the fireplace held the faint imprint of where Buddy had rested. Mark moved slowly, deliberately, as if speed might fracture something fragile inside him. He picked up Buddy's collar from the counter. It was worn smooth from years of use, the leather softened, the metal tag dulled. He turned it over in his hands, reading the name engraved there, his thumb tracing the edges. He walked to the window and tied the collar to the small hook beside it. The one Emily had once used for keys she always misplaced. The leather hung quietly against the glass, catching the light. Outside, snow fell just as it had the day Buddy first came home, 12 years earlier, a clumsy puppy, tumbling through drifts nearly as tall as he was. Mark remembered that day clearly now. The cold, the laughter, the feeling that something good had begun without asking permission. Mark stood there for a long time, watching the snow fall. He did not rush to fill the silence. He let it exist, unchallenged. For the first time since the night before, he felt something steady beneath the grief. Not relief, not peace. Something quieter. An understanding. Letting go, he realized, had never been about giving up. It was about showing up fully, even when the cost was unbearable. It was about choosing what spared the one you loved from pain, even if it left you carrying it instead. Mark rested his hand briefly against the window, breath fogging the glass. "I'll be okay," he said aloud, the words not yet true, but no longer impossible. Outside, snow continued to fall, soft and relentless, covering the ground without erasing what had been there before. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive to save what we love. Sometimes they arrive to give us the strength to let go. God does not always take the pain away, but He gives us courage when love asks something difficult of us. In everyday life, we are often tested not by how long we can hold on, but by whether we can choose compassion over fear, even when it breaks our hearts. If this story touched you, remember, every quiet act of love, every gentle goodbye, every moment of kindness is never unseen by God. If you've ever loved and lost, you are not alone. Share this story with someone who might need comfort today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if this story spoke to your heart, please subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can reach those who need them. May God bless you, protect you, and give peace to every heart watching.